Imagine this. You're watching a heated debate unfold before your eyes. One person speaks with measured words, their voice calm as they acknowledge complexity and nuance. The other speaks in absolutes, their voice rising with passionate conviction, cutting through the air like a blade. Who captures the audience? Who burns themselves into memory? Time and again, we witness the triumph of extremism over moderation, of simplicity over complexity, of certainty over doubt. From the hallowed halls of political discourse to the chaotic arena of social media, those who speak in bold, uncompromising terms don't just participate in the conversation. They dominate it. But why? Why? Is our world, the very fabric of our shared reality, truly designed to reward the most extreme voices among us? Is nuance becoming extinct in the marketplace of ideas? History, psychology, philosophy, they all point to a troubling, disturbing pattern. A pattern where moderate voices find themselves drowned out by the deafening chorus of extremes. From charismatic ideologues to viral social media personalities, those who paint the world in stark black and white rise, soar above those who dare acknowledge its infinite shades of gray. This isn't mere coincidence. No, it's deeply embedded in the very architecture of human cognition, woven into the evolving structures of our information ecosystem. In a world crushed beneath overwhelming complexity, those who offer simple answers to impossible questions provide something precious, something invaluable, certainty in uncertain times. Yet this forces us to confront an uncomfortable, haunting question. Is nuanced thinking a liability in this brutal battle of ideas? And more importantly, what does this mean for those of us who refuse to abandon intellectual honesty in favor of those seductive, appealing simplifications? The philosopher Hannah Arendt observed that extremism thrives not because people embrace falsehood, but because they find refuge in its clarity. To understand why extreme ideas spread like wildfire, while nuanced ones struggle to catch a spark, we must first examine the psychology, the raw human hunger behind our desperate need for certainty. Let's go deeper, much deeper. Imagine two speakers addressing a crowd. One says, softly, "This issue is multifaceted with legitimate concerns on both sides." The other proclaims, voice ringing with conviction, "There is only one truth here, and I know exactly what it is." Which message burns into your memory? Which wraps around you like a protective blanket, offering emotional comfort in a cold, confusing world? Arendt argued that we, all of us, naturally seek solid ground in a world that never stops shifting beneath our feet. When faced with complexity, our minds recoil, experiencing what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. That mental agony that comes from holding contradictory beliefs, from seeing too many sides, from understanding too much. Extremist thinking offers a powerful, seductive remedy. It eliminates this dissonance by presenting a world of perfect moral clarity, where the most tangled, complex problems have beautifully simple solutions. This isn't merely abstract theory. It explains why polarizing figures throughout history have captured the public imagination, commanding loyalty and devotion, while moderates fade into the shadows, into obscurity. Extremism offers something moderation cannot, will not, a sense of belonging, purpose, and identity in our increasingly fragmented, atomized world. There are two fundamental approaches to engaging with reality: what we might call complexity thinking versus certainty thinking. Complexity thinking embraces ambiguity, acknowledges limitations, and remains open, vulnerable to revising deeply held beliefs in light of new evidence. Certainty thinking, by contrast, slices the world into rigid categories of right and wrong, us versus them, good versus evil, creating a battlefield where nuance goes to die. While complexity thinking leads to more accurate understandings of our messy, contradictory reality, certainty thinking is far more efficient at spreading, at capturing and holding our precious attention. The moderate voice hesitates. It depends, they say, voice barely audible above the noise. Meanwhile, the extremist declares, voice ringing with authority. It is so. And in our attention economy, this brutal marketplace where awareness is the ultimate currency, those who offer the gift of certainty claim the largest, most valuable share. This creates a troubling, devastating paradox. The very qualities that lead to intellectual honesty, nuance, doubt, the willingness to change one's mind, are precisely the qualities that undermine the spread of ideas in our current information ecosystem. Meanwhile, those who speak with unwarranted confidence, who reduce the most complex issues to simple, digestible narratives, who never admit doubt. Their ideas travel farther, move faster, spreading like a contagion through our collective consciousness. So, what does this mean for us? Should we abandon nuance entirely, throwing ourselves into the seductive embrace of extremism? Or is there another path, another way to reconcile intellectual integrity with effective communication? To answer that, we must look deeper into the psychology of those rare souls who resist the gravitational pull toward extremes, those who maintain their fidelity to complexity in a world that rewards simplicity. Picture a vast landscape of ideas, stretching to the horizon in all directions. In this wilderness, the most vivid colors and loudest sounds naturally, inevitably draw our attention. In this environment, nuance is subtle, quiet, easily overlooked and forgotten. The mind, overwhelmed by the constant flood of information, gravitates toward the bold and unambiguous like a moth to flame. This isn't a moral failing. No, it's a feature of human cognition, wired deep into our neural architecture. Our brains evolved in environments where quick, decisive judgments often meant the difference between survival and death. Ambiguity was a luxury our ancestors simply couldn't afford. Hesitation meant extinction. Modern society is no different. Beneath our thin veneer of rationality, beneath our pretense of enlightenment, the primal battle for certainty rages on, unceasing. Those who embrace extremes often share a defining, magnetic trait. They provide certainty in an uncertain world. This isn't accidental. It's a powerful, adaptive strategy that allows ideologies to spread and dominate in our competitive information environments. Psychologists have extensively studied the traits that predict susceptibility to extremist thinking. The desperate need for cognitive closure, the instinctive intolerance of ambiguity, and perhaps most significantly, the profound desire for clear, unquestionable moral boundaries. These aren't pathologies, but common, universal human tendencies that extremism exploits with terrifying efficiency. Consider the thought leaders, politicians, and influencers who have captured mass attention throughout human history. From ancient demagogues to modern ideologues, the pattern is clear, undeniable. Nuance is a liability when competing for our limited, precious attention. Bold, unqualified claims spread faster, reach farther than careful, qualified ones. But here's the paradox, the bitter irony. Extremism's power to spread quickly is often matched by its tendency toward self-destruction. Ideas that cannot bend, cannot accommodate complexity, tend to fracture, to shatter, when confronted with reality's inevitable messy complications. So if extremism often leads to its own undoing, does this mean that nuance and moderation are destined to prevail? Are we saved by the self-destructive nature of extremes? Not necessarily. To understand why, we must challenge one of modernity's most persistent, comforting illusions. The naive belief that truth, on its own merit, naturally rises to the top. From childhood, we're told a soothing story that in the great marketplace of ideas, the best arguments eventually win, that reason and evidence triumph over emotion and simplification, that truth, given enough time, will always prevail. But as we navigate our increasingly complex, chaotic information environment, a brutal, devastating contradiction emerges. The ideas that spread most widely aren't necessarily the most accurate. They're often the most psychologically satisfying, the most emotionally resonant, the most easily digested. This disconnect isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. The marketplace of ideas was never designed to elevate truth. It evolved to elevate ideas that people want to believe, that confirm existing worldviews, that offer simple, clean solutions to messy, complex problems. Psychological research has revealed what's known as the backfire effect, the maddening tendency for people to actually strengthen their beliefs when presented with contradictory evidence. In other words, reason alone often fails, collapses when it dares to challenge our deeply held convictions. This creates a troubling, dangerous reality. Those who embrace intellectual honesty, who acknowledge complexity and admit uncertainty, find themselves at a brutal competitive disadvantage against those who speak in confident, unshakable absolutes. But does this mean nuance is doomed? Should we abandon complexity in favor of appealing simplifications? Not quite. The key is understanding the game without becoming corrupted by it. Those who suffer most in this environment are often those who believe that truth alone is sufficient, that good ideas naturally rise to the top. But those who learn to balance intellectual integrity with strategic communication, who package complexity in accessible forms, can still advance nuanced thinking in a world that resists it. The truth is this: in the battle of ideas, the playing field isn't level. But with skill and creativity, even complex ideas can find their audience. Arendt recognized this struggle as fundamental to modern existence. Her answer wasn't to surrender to extremism, nor to retreat into academic obscurity. Instead, she pointed to something higher, a way to communicate complex truths without compromising their essence. To understand this approach, we must explore one of her most powerful insights: the concept of enlarged thinking, the capacity to consider multiple perspectives without losing one's ethical center. Imagine standing at the intersection of multiple worldviews. Behind you lies the comfortable certainty of your own perspective. Before you stretches the vast landscape of alternative viewpoints, each with its own internal logic and emotional appeal. Most will retreat to familiar territory, seeking refuge in the certainty of their existing beliefs. But a few will venture forward, exploring different perspectives while maintaining their capacity for judgment. These are the practitioners of enlarged thinking, individuals who resist extremism not by ignoring opposing views, but by genuinely engaging with them. Arendt's concept of enlarged thinking isn't about empty relativism or both-sidesism. It's about the courage to see the world through others' eyes while maintaining one's capacity for independent judgment. Unlike the rigid certainty of extremism or the empty neutrality of false equivalence, enlarged thinking seeks understanding as a precondition for meaningful critique. At its heart, enlarged thinking is about expanding our mental horizons, not merely tolerating different perspectives, but actively engaging with them. It requires the humility to recognize that our own viewpoint is necessarily limited, shaped by our particular position in the world. While extremists find power in certainty, practitioners of enlarged thinking find strength in exploration. Unlike the fragile dogmatism that cannot tolerate challenge, enlarged thinking gains resilience through continuous exposure to alternative viewpoints. This is why the most influential moderate voices aren't merely middling compromisers, but active synthesizers, individuals who can integrate seemingly contradictory perspectives into more comprehensive understanding. They don't split the difference between opposing views. They transcend the opposition by finding deeper principles that unite them. So how do we cultivate this capacity in ourselves and others? How do we navigate an information environment that rewards extremism while maintaining our commitment to nuance? The answer lies in understanding the architecture of persuasion, not as a weapon, but as a tool. Imagine this. You're engaged in conversation with someone whose worldview fundamentally differs from yours. If you present your full, complex position with all its qualifications and nuances, you're likely to be misunderstood or dismissed. But if you reduce your view to an extreme caricature, you sacrifice the very complexity that makes it valuable. This is the dilemma that moderate voices face daily. The mistake most make is believing they have only two choices: embrace extremism or accept irrelevance. But there is a third path, one that blends intellectual integrity with strategic communication. The key is understanding that how we present ideas is as important as the ideas themselves. Extremists intuitively grasp this. Moderates often don't. The most successful communicators of complex ideas share several traits. First, they anchor complexity in concrete examples rather than abstract principles. While extremism thrives on sweeping generalizations, nuanced thinking comes alive through specific cases that illuminate larger patterns. Second, they understand the power of narrative. Human beings are storytelling creatures. We process information most easily when it's embedded in narratives with clear characters, conflicts, and resolutions. Complex ideas can be conveyed through stories that engage emotions while stimulating intellect. Third, they recognize that credibility comes not from pretending to know everything, but from acknowledging the limits of their knowledge. Paradoxically, admitting uncertainty in specific areas makes one's certainty in others more believable. Fourth, they practice what rhetoricians call strategic concession, acknowledging the valid aspects of opposing viewpoints before presenting their own perspective. This signals intellectual honesty and opens listeners to considering alternative views. Many moderate voices fail because they assume complexity itself is persuasive. But in a world of limited attention, complexity must be packaged in accessible forms without being fundamentally compromised. The challenge isn't simply to resist extremism, but to make nuance compelling. To demonstrate that complex thinking isn't a weakness, but a form of strength. Not indecision, but a deeper form of commitment to truth. So, what does this mean for our information ecosystem? Is the triumph of extremism inevitable? Or can we create environments where nuanced thinking thrives? The answer isn't simple, but it begins with recognizing that ideas spread not just because they're true, but because they're psychologically appealing and socially advantageous. Moderate voices fail not because they're wrong, but because they often ignore these dimensions of communication. The battle against extremism isn't won through counterbalancing extremism, but by making nuance accessible, by showing that complexity isn't a burden, but a path to deeper understanding. Arendt understood that the greatest threat to democracy wasn't any particular ideology, but the collapse of spaces where genuine thinking could occur. Her vision wasn't of a world where moderation triumphs over extremism, but where thinking itself, deep, nuanced, enlarged thinking, becomes possible again. So is nuance doomed in a world that rewards extremes? Not if we learn to communicate complexity compellingly, to make the case not just for particular positions, but for the value of nuanced thinking itself. If this exploration of extremism and moderation has challenged your assumptions and sparked deeper curiosity about how ideas spread in modern society, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to like this video, share it with those who appreciate nuanced thinking, and stay tuned for new content. Together, let's continue the journey toward understanding complexity in a world that craves simplicity.